So I punched him right in the face. I sound like I'm in a jar. But I punched him right in the face. You know, growing up, I was the youngest kid. Anyone else the youngest in here? Yeah, you guys get me. We agree. When you're the youngest, you have to learn to fight for yourself, right? Like, no one's going to fight for you because there's no one younger than you who's like, looks up to you like, oh, you're so cool. But according to Bustle, an online website which is a collection of work that's meant for entertainment only and has no credibility whatsoever, according to them, the youngest sibling tends to be the risk takers, explorers, smarter, and more creative. Not a bad title. And that has nothing to do with my message. I just wanted to put that in there for all you youngest childs. But if you're wondering, you're like, wait, who do you punch? What happened? What did I miss? Okay, I'll get there. So me and my brother Micah, some of you guys know him, we're arguing about something. You know, we're kids. We tend to argue a lot. And I mean, I never started them. I was a really good kid, very like self-controlled, sober-minded, you know. But he started an argument about something, right? And so if this is our room, our door's right here. There's like a bunk bed, and then his dresser's behind me, and then my dresser's on the other side of the room, and there's like desks. But we're standing here, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, if you say one more word, I'm going to punch you in the face. And he's like, okay. And he said something, and so I just punched him. Immediately, he's like, what did that feel like? I'm like, bro, I just punched you in the face. You're asking me what it felt like to punch someone? But anyway, the book of James is the best way I can describe it. It's kind of like a punch to the face for the average believer, or at least it is for me. But don't be discouraged. So it does seem a little intimidating, but we're going to go through it today, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit about how it's not. So flip with me to the book of James, chapter 1. While you're flipping there, I'm going to just give you a little behind the curtain, what's backstage. The book of James was written by James, who is Jesus' brother. So that's really significant when you look at the way that he starts the book. He says, James, a servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ. And with a story like the one I just told you, isn't that kind of insane? Like, can you imagine if I came up here and I was like, hi guys, like, I'm Matt Parks, I'm a servant to my brother Micah. Like, you guys would be like, what the heck? Like, brothers don't do that. Brothers aren't servants to one another. They definitely don't put their identity and their servanthood to their brothers. But that's so significant because it's right off the bat. He starts his book with that. So James writes the book to reprove his fellow believers for their backslide in faith and character. Now, don't be discouraged. I told you that. But like it seems intense, and the book of James kind of is, and it's a little bit convicting, but it's a little bit more than that. So we're going to read James 1:19 through 27. Know this, my beloved brothers. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the words, and not just hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. For if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Little intense, but we're going to go through this. And if you look at it from like 30,000 feet, which is like an airplane like flying over the ground, they're usually at 30,000 feet. And so when you're looking down, you kind of like see like, oh, there's buildings and stuff like that, but you don't see all the parts to it. So, right, like if we look at this passage from that 30,000 feet, we're like, wow, this is kind of intense. This is kind of like convicting and sometimes painful to hear, but we're going to break it down. So the first one is, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. What's the first thing we do when we're angry? It's usually like say something, right? Because that's the fastest thing we can get to. It's our fastest response that we can have to something that makes us mad. Like if you guys are from California or you've been here long enough to know that California drivers are insane. They'll just cut you off, they'll speed over, they'll honk at you even though they're the ones who tried to kill you. And it's like so confusing. But fun fact, I actually love California drivers. They're so decisive. They're like, I'm coming in your lane, get out of the way. And you're like, oh, okay. But like if you're in Minnesota, they turn on a blinker, you're like, are you coming? Should I drive past? What are you doing? Like, that's not a problem here. But, yeah, I know, right? But when you're in California, and when a California driver cuts you off or something, we usually say something, right? We're like, oh, that was so rude, or shame on you, right? Nothing worse than that, though. But that's so crazy. Like, we have to be careful about that, because God warns against our habits right here in this verse. He knows that our habit is to say something right away. It's to respond with a verbal. But he says, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all rampant wickedness and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your soul. There's so many cases in the Bible where God dealt with men who are just like us, who just react over respond. They're like, no. Like, think of Moses. I think James mentioned, who spoke last? 2 times ago, not Peter. Yes, Jonathan spoke about Moses, and that was so funny because that's an illustration here. But think of Moses when God said, hey, Moses, I'm going to use you to free my people from Pharaoh. Moses immediately said, no, I can't. Like, I have a speech impediment. I'm not good enough. And God's like, whoa, listen, I'm still going to use you. Or think about Jonah when God's like, hey, Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to tell them about my grace and speak deliverance on them. Jonah's like, skirt, no, God, I'm not doing that. Are you kidding me? Those are sinful people. I'm not going to Nineveh. But God's like, whoa, listen. I want you to go, and I want you to share with them the same grace that I've given you and teach you something in the process. You know, we react over respond, but God calls us to respond over react. He doesn't want us to simply have an emotional reaction to something that he's calling us to or something he tells us to. Like, when I read this passage in James for the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so sinful, like all this stuff. And yes, that's true. I am sinful. I'm not perfect. I'm broken, and this is really convicting. But God said, whoa, listen. You are those things, but you're also more than that because I've stepped in, because I've redeemed you through that. The second part of this first passage, because it's grouped in 2 verses, or 3, verse 21, therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls. That's so convicting to me too, because how many of you know that, like, did anyone grow up here going to Awanas or like some memory verse stuff? Yeah, right? So there'll be times where I'm just living my life, and then I'll be like, oh, I'm going to do this or that, and then all of a sudden a verse will come to mind, and it's like, whoa, wait, I shouldn't do that, or I should do this. One that comes to mind for me a lot is, it's actually James 4:17, which I didn't know it was in James, so I wrote this, but it's, he who knows the right thing to do and does not do it is sinning. And that was like, that's not an exact quote, but that's pretty close. That comes to my head all the time. Like, even this year, as being an RA, I'm going to be real with you guys, it's a very secluded job. So like when you're, like Peter knows, and Elijah too, like when you're on call, it's very much so just you. You're walking around the apartments. If you see something wrong or you hear something wrong that you need to look into, all the pressure's on you to say, am I going to deal with this or keep walking? Because it's so much easier for my night if I just keep walking. You know, but you might hear something or have to look into it. That verse comes to mind so much for me. I'll like hear people like saying weird stuff or parking in the wrong spot or something like that, and I'll just be like, oh, like it's not that big a deal, whatever, it's just sin, they'll deal with it. And I just keep walking, and then that verse comes to mind. He who knows the right thing to do and does not do it is sinning. So I have to go back and I have to deal with it and say, hello. So if you live at the apartments, please don't cause that turmoil in my life. Just be good, and I'll never have to think about it. All right, moving on. James 1:22, but be doers of the word and not hearers, only deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away at once, forgetting what he was like. That's so crazy, right? So in this, God says, hey, look, you guys are messed up. You're jacked up. You got some stuff. You got some sin. But more than that, he's like, I'm going to give you a tool so you can see all that. I'm going to give you my word, so when you read it, you're convicted, and you can see all the stuff you need to deal with. Think about in the morning when you guys get up, like, we have to get ready for the day, right? Like, I'm looking at all you guys, you're all beautiful. Like, you all dealt with your stuff. You combed your hair, you popped that zit, you got that boogie out of your nose, right? But God says here, if you're a hearer of the word and not a doer, you're just like that person who looks in the mirror, who sees that, wow, I got a fatty unibrow going on. I got something in my teeth. And then you walk away and you're like, oh, I forgot. Oh, hey, you want to go on a date this afternoon? And it's like, wait, no, like, you have to deal with that stuff, right? So God, we would react, right? We'd be like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so sinful. Like, I know what's wrong with me, and I just keep going. God's like, no. Listen, yes, you're sinful. Yes, these things are jacked up. but I've given you my word so that you can work on that, so you can move through it, so you can deal with those issues. James 26. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. That's a pretty intense statement. Seems to be a theme for the book of James: intense, convicting, difficult, hard. But that's so good. So I remember once, I think I was like 12 to 13. My family went, we visited my great aunt and my great uncle on this camp that they worked at. It wasn't a Christian camp or anything like that. But it was in Utah, and it's like an adventure camp. Like, you can do paintballing, zip lining, ride quads around. I remember one thing we did, though, as a family, is we went on the horseback ride. And so, like, we're all just in a huge line, and there's, like, a little trail we're, like, following and stuff. And with my horse, like, to get him to turn it, and if you guys have ever, like, ridden a horse, you know how to do it. Like, you just gently, like, pull on the reins and stuff like that. And a bridle is actually like this metal bar that goes into a horse's mouth. So when you pull on one side of the reins, it pulls back on the horse's mouth, so it turns his head, and he's like, all right, we're going this way, and like goes whichever way you lead him. So God says, hey, if anyone thinks he's religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. So it's saying, hey, like, we know our tongues have power, right? We know that when we encourage someone, it can make their day, it can speak life into them. Or if we say something harsh or cruel and tear them down, it can stick forever. One of the biggest lies we've heard growing up, and I'm glad nowadays we like recognize it, it's a lie, is sticks and stones may break my bones, but that's a lie. It's a filthy, rotten lie. Words stick with you. They stick with all of us. And especially in today's culture where words are so prevalent, I don't think this verse is specifically about just your tongue. While it is, while we do have impact with what we say, in today's culture we have so many other ways to express our tongue. Our tongue gets extended even farther. We have Instagram, we have text messages, we have phone calls. Literally our words extend so much farther than we could think. So it's saying, hey, be careful, bridle your tongue, guide your tongue like you would guide a horse, to say the right things, to encourage people, to lift up people, to use your gift for good. Verse 27, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. I want to ask you guys, who are your orphans and widows? Maybe literally you have orphans and widows that you're loving, that you're encouraging, that you're helping, but maybe not. So for me, it's not, I actually do have literal orphans and widows in my youth group. So in my high school group, at my church, The Grove, I have one guy comes to mind particularly. Some of you guys have probably heard me talk about him. His name's Tanner. He's this little 15-year-old punk kid. He's so funny. But he just really loves the Lord, and his mom and him are by themselves. So his dad left when they were really little, and it's kind of jacked up. But we all have our sin. But so like what comes to mind when I read this passage of who are your orphans and widows is like, I do have orphans and widows that I'm loving. They're in my youth group. And for you guys, it may not be specifically that. Like, I have other kids in my group, too, who aren't literal orphans, and people at my church who aren't actual widows. But basically, it's who are those people you're loving who are unable to give you something in return? It's like, because if you think about in this time, widows, they didn't have a husband, and if they didn't have a son, they were by themselves, right? They couldn't do much. They couldn't own land. They couldn't participate in business. Like, it was so hard to, like, survive. So when you helped an orphan or a widow, it was very selfless. It was, hey, I'm going to do this for you, and I know you can't give me anything in return, and I'm not going to expect that. So who are your guys' orphans and widows? You see, the whole point of this passage and like why I'm speaking on James and why it's so difficult is to take a step back. So like when we see stuff, when God calls us to do something, when God calls us to love orphans and widows, to deal with our sin, to be slow to speak and fast to listen, all these things, we can get very emotional. We're like, wait, I've been doing it wrong all this time, or oh my gosh, I'm so sinful, and all these things. But God very much so gives us tools to see that. He says, whoa, listen, I want you to respond to what I'm calling you to and not react to it. And that's actually the end of my sermon, so quickie. Thank you. 14 minutes.
How many times did you do it?
One time. and I know it shows.
How much did it come at your time, the time you practiced it?
When I practiced it, I actually cut some stuff out, and it was 27 minutes.
You have a super way of communicating. I just love the way you communicate. It's very informal. It's very spontaneous. And I would say the way you use your voice is like a model of how your voice should be used. You have a good voice inflection. You use the pause at time. You speak fast. But some people can get away with speaking fast, and you're one of those people. But still, at times, you might want to slow it down a bit.
Okay.
I love the way you use your voice. The best thing about the sermon was, well, one of the problems I have is I don't get a thesis statement here.
Yeah, and I knew that after I looked I practiced it yesterday, and I was like, I don't have a thesis, but I was like, it's too late.
It's harder to get a thesis here because this part of James reads like Proverbs.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of independent things that stand on its own. So what you've got to do is look into there and find out a common thread between all of these things. And that would be your thesis statement. But again, it's not like you're preaching a parable or a section of the Gospels or even in a section of the epistles where you can get a clear distinction of this is the thesis. This is a tough one to get the thesis. And I like your background on the book of James, behind the curtain. That was a nice way to introduce it.
Thanks.
I never thought about the fact, I knew Jesus was James' half-brother, but it's interesting how when you talk about the tension between brothers, that James would refer to himself as a bondservant as a brother. I never thought about that before. And have you guys ever thought about that before? I never thought about that before, and that's really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of wonder what it was like with Jesus and his siblings.
Can you imagine?
Because he had 4 brothers, they're named in the book of Acts, and he had sisters too. So, what would it have been like to be Jesus' sibling? Because if you had an argument with your brother, you were always wrong. There you go.
Yeah.